Good evening. I am with Andrew Morris, who is a former IPP prisoner that's going to talk about a bit about what IPP is and some of the injustices that are going on in the system. Evening, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Evening, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So, tell me a little bit about your experience with the IPP system.
Yeah, so I mean, some people may remember because I've spoken about it a bit. The IPP came about in 2003. The first person to get the IPP, indeterminate public protection, was in 2005. And at the time, there were about 400 different offences that you could get an IPP for. About 9,000 or so people were locked up on IPP over the course of its life when judges were giving these sentences out almost like sweeties. In 2012, the IPP was repealed. So IPPs are not given out anymore. It's been varied. So there's something called EDS, which is the extended detention, something or other. I remember the exact acronym for it. But during the life of IPP, about 75 people have taken their own lives because effectively you're locked up without a release date. Some people would possibly argue that it's a bit much what I'm about to say, but what I was going to say is it's almost tantamount to something called internment, which existed in Northern Ireland in the 60s and 70s, where people were locked up without trial, without charge, and kept on an indeterminate basis for quite some time. Some people might think that's a stretch, but I think IPP is tantamount to the same thing. Sadly, we're at a stage now where there are at least 1,400 people still locked up on IPP at the moment. So there's 1,400 individuals, 1,400 families, extended families and friends who are still experiencing, the tragedy really of IPP. The sad thing as well, last thing I'll kind of say about this is that the person who came up with it, David Blunkett, Lord Blunkett, has himself said that he regrets it. He said that it's inexcusable. He's on record as saying that he's really, he says that there are moments, if I can paraphrase, where it keeps him up at night because he's been trying to help individuals to navigate their way through the system. So it's shocking. So now we've handed over from one administration to another, and the administration that it was under, obviously Lord Blunkett was a Labour Home Secretary, Justice Secretary, is now effectively in opposition because his party's not in government, and so there's been a really long-winded discussion around what, if anything, can change.
Yeah, I mean, for those who don't understand it further, I know of a guy that was sentenced on this IPP a few years ago for a quite a short term, for like 6 months, but because his mental health was so bad, he kept getting into trouble, and as he kept getting into trouble, this just kept getting longer and longer and longer. So now he's been in for like 12 or 13 years on a 6-month sentence. That is why it's so barbaric, because there are people that are, in essence, serving a life sentence for stealing a bike, or and you got that sentence, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I got one. I did a total of 12.5 years. My original tariff was 1 year, 200 and something days. It would have been 2 years, but less the time I spent on remand before I was sentenced. And I met a guy, similar to you. I met a guy on my journey who got a 28-day IPP tariff and did a number of years. I met another guy who I remember he put in, this particular guy, I remember him. He put it into perspective for me, because when I was trying to get my head wrapped around what it actually meant for me, he said to me, look, you're not going to get out until you do a course that they ask you to do. And once you've done that course, then it's not guaranteed. And then he told me, he said, look, I've got a 12-month tariff, and the course I need to do has a 5-year waiting list. It was at that moment that it really put into perspective what I was looking at. I mean, in the end, I sat in a particular jail in the West Country, waiting to do a course. I think I waited about 4 years in this jail to do the course, and then eventually did it, and then went to open prison. And I made mistakes. I got sent back to close conditions. I'm not without stain in that sense, but I found it at times really difficult. So just hearing that story of this guy doing 6 months and going like a yo-yo, I can completely understand why that would happen. Some people, they just lose it. Their head goes, and they get stuck in a place of numbing the pain with whatever drugs or whatever the case may be. I'm not saying in this case, as I don't know who that was, but it's tragic. It really is. It's tragic.
It is. I mean, at least when you go to jail on a normal sentence, you pretty much straight away get a release date. And when you're going to get out. Is it still 2/3 and then you get out?
Yeah.
So 2/3 of your sentence, then you get out. So if you're doing 4 years, you can be out. Just would it be just over 3, wouldn't it?
Just over, yeah.
So so you would pretty much get a date. But the thing about the IPP sentences is that you, like you said, you would get put in, and it might only be for 28 days. It's not only for 28 days, is it? It's a minimum of 28 days, and then it's basically how they see fit. It took years of your life.
I think the troubling thing at the moment as well is that fairly recently the Justice Select Committee went on a journey of gathering evidence, and a number of people gave evidence in public and some gave evidence in private. I gave some evidence in private, and they produced a report that basically said that they think that the IPP needs to be converted into I haven't read the full report, but my understanding of it is that they were basically saying that IPP should be released, and effectively the sentences should be converted from indeterminate to determinate. And my understanding is that that's been rejected by the government, and as if to kind of add insult to injury, we're in a place now where there's thought about issues around parole and the parole process. There are questions, I think, around the independence of the parole board to be able to make decisions around anybody being released. We've seen the programs recently around Charles Bronson, who isn't even an IPP, but has served about nearly 5 decades of his life in prison, which is just insane. But then also we've seen a program, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's just called Parole, which is following the parole process in prisons. And bizarrely, one of the people who appears on that program sat on one of my panels. I didn't get parole on that occasion, but it kind of is what it is. I think that what is sad is that when you have these select committees that go out of their way to look into stuff and they come back with I'm disappointed, I've got to be honest, and I know a lot of people are disappointed, but they come back with arguments. They're not in our shoes, but they've collected some evidence, gone back to the powers that be to say, look, actually this is what we think that you need to change this, and there's a real resistance to it. And what is even more frightening about that is that it's at a time when we're politically in a difficult place, because there could be a general election any minute. And if that's the case, then it means that, again, IPP is kicked to the back of the queue, because nobody will want to kind of deal with those issues until an election has been called and is resolved, and we know what we know at that time, which is that, you know, there's a change or there isn't a change of government, whatever the case may be. And that's troubling. It really is. You know, this IPP, I think what I'm trying to say really is that IPP shouldn't be a political hot potato. It needs to be, the parole board need to be allowed to do what they do. And these guys who are continuing, and girls as well, because there are a number of women that, you know, people don't know about who are on IPP as well. Not as many as the males, obviously, but who are serving this sentence, whose mental health is, you know, it's shocking. You know, they must be getting to a stage now where they're wit's end. And let's not forget the fact that a number of these prisoners will have served through the pandemic in custody at a time when, you know, if you juxtapose what we were going through out here, just imagine what they were going through in there.
Yeah, that can't be easy. You know, I was talking to Kevin Lane and Frank Portinari a couple of days ago on a podcast, and we were talking about the mental health of prisoners. But especially through the pandemic, you know, it was difficult enough if you were free, because, you know, I during the pandemic, I found myself in the first lockdown really sort of battling depression and mental illness. And the second one, which is why I started doing this, to help me sort of deal with it. But in prison, you don't have that. You don't have that support. Prison isn't really equipped for that. You know, I haven't been in a long time, but, you know, I've been told that, you know, I know some play on the mental health card to try and get the help. I understand that there are always people inside and out that will do that, but it can't be easy, especially through a pandemic, going through that and having a sentence that determines you in jail for, well, you don't know how long, and you've got nothing to look forward to. You know, the only thing that I can compare it to that I know about is some of the miscarriages of justice that are going on, like Mike William Osborne, that's served 14 years for a murder he didn't commit. He was in jail at the time that the murder happened, and because his cellmate was trying to get his green card and stuff, he told loads of lies that have been proved lies. But this has put an innocent man behind bars for a minimum of 30 years for a murder he didn't commit. And we juxtapose that against Liam Dean, the man that murdered my niece, you know, who himself was murdered by his cellmate. He got life with a minimum of 10 years. So it seems excessive to me. You know, somebody can get a minimum of 10 years for something like murder, or a minimum of 30 years for a murder that somebody didn't commit, but then somebody that goes in for a relatively small crime, like, I don't know, you know, like my friend, chronic bike theft, he's you know, 3 or 5 time loser. And, you know, he's now facing more time in prison. And yeah, I can understand what you're saying about, you know, how it was in Northern Ireland, because it does seem like that to me. It really does. So are you still in effect on license?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Will you be for life?
That's a good question. And you know what? I don't even know the answer to it. That's the thing. I am still on license. I report, I think it's every other month or whatever it is. They give me the dates and I just turn up. But I am in a position now where I think the supervision element can be lifted this year.
Yeah.
But at the moment, there's talk about the rules changing, and I really would hope that they won't change retrospectively from underneath me. You know, that as they are now, they'll apply to me and others like me, so that we can apply to have the supervision element lifted sooner rather than later. But yeah, don't know the answer. I mean, it feels a little bit like the beginning of the IPP, because when I was first in custody, it took about 2 or 3 years before I understood the ramifications, because no one could explain it to me. No prison staff. It's really difficult because sometimes you're in prison, you don't want to listen to everybody in prison because everyone's got their own journey, and sometimes people are really negative. And there's that old saying, be careful who you hang around with, because if you hang around with 9 negative people, guess who's going to become number 10? And so you have to be really kind of careful in that sense. But for me, like I said, it was that guy that put it into perspective for me when he told me how long he had and how long his waiting list for the course was as a minimum. But the other thing really about this, because for me, I mean, I've been kind of going on a bit of a crusade, a careful one, because I do a particular job, and there are rules around what I do in that job. Kind of keeping a very careful balance of what I say and what that kind of stuff. But I just feel that change needs to happen. Partly, I mean, yes, it's kind of subjective because I'm going through it, and if I wasn't going through it, maybe I wouldn't feel as passionately as I do. I don't know. All I know is that there's lots of us affected. And the other thing is that people constantly ask me, why should anyone really care? And I've got the figures wrong, because I was saying that reoffending costs 10 billion. It doesn't. It costs 18 plus billion. So to put that into perspective, I did a quick kind of mathematics. That's about £3,000 per head of population, based on about 60 million-ish people in the UK. So on average, reoffending is costing each and every one of us about £3,000 per year. I don't know about anybody else, but I could do with an extra £3,000 in my pay packet, instead of it going on, prison places or the cost of broken window syndrome in society. I really could, but here we are, still having to fight for what is right. What is right is that, as you said earlier on, and that is that the legal system once upon a time was built on the premise that you knew, you had a certainty. Look, you've done this crime. This is the minimum you're going to get. It could possibly be this much, but you know that you're going home on this date.
Yeah.
It's only right. It's only right. And the other thing really is that I understand that I've never been able to confirm one way or the other, but I understand that the IPP effectively was imported from either the United States or Canada, and it was a failed piece of legislation in those jurisdictions. So why on earth did the UK pick it up, only to now find itself in a position where we could have 1,400 plus Charles Bronsons, people who are completely lost in a system that has destroyed any hope of a future.
Yeah. Can I ask if there's any correlation between race in that sentence? Is there more young black men in the system that have got IPP?
I haven't got the figures at the moment, but I know that the Prison Reform Trust and some of these other organisations have been really good at publishing this, and I understand, and I hope I've got it right, but disproportionately, yes, it does affect black and Asian men more than our white counterparts. And while that is kind of an issue for me, the whole just IPP regardless of colour, is the problem, and it needs to be rectified. I mean, do you know what? I think if we're honest, there are people in society that maybe deserve IPP type sentences.
I agree.
But, the amount of people that got this sentence wasn't what was envisaged. Because originally, when this was written, it was estimated, and I still don't understand the mathematics behind this, but it was estimated that IPPs wouldn't be given to more than 900 of the worst sexual and violent offenders. So how somebody's come along and decided that over a period of, I don't know how many years, only 900 people are going to be deserving of this sentence, I have no idea. Unless there was a kind of precursor that you give out a minimum of maybe, I don't know, 100 a year or 200 a year, whatever the case may be. But it's very clear that whatever happened, the legislation was in my view, misinterpreted by the judges, because judges gave them out, willy-nilly, because they read the law in a particular way. I remember what the judge said to me the day that he gave me mine, and he just said, the circumstances of this section are made out, and I was just like, what does that mean? And then I heard the word indeterminate and life, and I was just like, there's got to be a mistake. I'm at this point in the doc, I'm thinking that he's talking about another case, and he's about to deal with my case afterwards. Literally thinking that, and then my barrister tried to explain to me in the best way she possibly could, because she didn't fully understand it. And this is the problem: is trying to put square pegs in round holes. Always trying to push things before they're ready. This wasn't cooked up enough, cooked up properly. I actually wouldn't be against indeterminate sentencing completely. I really wouldn't, because guess what? There are people out there who commit, and I'm sorry to hear about your niece, because I didn't know about that, but there are people that commit these heinous crimes that deserve sentences like this. That's the long and short of it. And if people feel aggrieved by me saying that type of thing, that is what that is. It's just my view. My view is also, I've even got to a point where there are people, and again, some may disagree, but generally most have agreed with me. Open prison does nothing for life sentence prisoners, because very often I tried to achieve 3 goals in open prison. I didn't achieve one of them, and they were really simple: driving license, a job, and education, return to education. I achieved not one of those things in open prison. And I just think that it's tragic, because my thing is that everybody, no matter who you are, doesn't matter what socioeconomic group you come from, what shade of color, skin you have, everyone who finds themselves in a position where they end up in prison should be able to leave better than when they went in.
Yes, so we were saying this the other day, that it's my belief that when you are sentenced of a crime, your punishment is going to prison. It's losing your freedom, losing your liberty. I saw all this being argued over. You see it all the time on social media, especially when it comes to things like Christmas, and articles in the local papers and stuff that talk about Christmas meals in prisons, and people are saying, oh well, they shouldn't get this and they shouldn't get that. My point is, you've lost your freedom, you've lost your liberty, and you shouldn't keep getting punished. Your punishment is you're in prison. You can't vote. You can't do anything. You basically just a number. It's not easy in prison by any standard. I know some people find it easier than others, but I do agree that there are certain ranks of offenders that deserve to have indeterminate sentences, like the ones that not on normal exercise and things like that, because they just keep reoffending and reoffending. And you see it multiple times daily, and it crimes like that it breaks my heart. But and then there are those that just keep doing the same crime over and over again. I don't know if they ever brought it in, but was it 3-time or 5-time? And it was a mandatory life sentence.
Yeah, I mean, I know that they did have a 2-strike life sentence, and that there are still. You see, this it's interesting you say that actually, because there are still 2-strike life as in on old legislation that is older than IPP that are still doing time, and some of them are like 15, perhaps even 20 years over tariff, which is worrying. I mean, one of the things that I remember a guy that I met from, I think he was from the Congo actually. No, I'm lying. He was from Ivory Coast, and he said to me, one of the things you can tell, and I'd never heard this before. We had this conversation. He just said to me, you can tell a society by the way they treat their prisoners.
Yes.
And when you go to places like Finland and Norway, I haven't been there, but I've seen some of the documentaries because I've been blessed to become, a trustee of the Raphael Rowe Foundation, which is, an organization basically set up by a guy who was wrongly imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit.
Yes.
And he's been going around some of these jails and seeing how they treat, their offenders. And in Finland, their prison population is minuscule. I mean, obviously it's a smaller population, but in comparison to the number of offences and offenders, they've got no more than about 3,000 or 4,000 people locked up at any one time. At one point, I think the UK had sort of 40,000 people locked up. It's more than doubled. It's nearly 100,000 people in custody these days. So the question is, what's changed from then to now? And I think it's just that the statutes have just gone crazy. Things that probably could be dealt with slightly differently. People just get banged up, and it's
sad. It is really sad. I believe that everybody, no matter whether they have their liberty or not, deserves an education, and it's so hard to get an education within the prison system. I've seen some of these documentaries that you're talking about. I think their reoffending rate is something like 10%, which is relatively low. But you can see how they treat them. The judge shakes their hand, the police shake their hand. They're taken into the prison. They're called by their name. They get their hands shaken, and they give them keys to their rooms. And the only requirement is that they have a job and that they are polite to the staff and polite to the other prisoners. They're not treated like prisoners, and they're given, they get to do their own shopping within the prison and stuff like that. That doesn't happen here, because it feels like that once you're in that system, it's about the money that the prison's getting. It's about money per head. I do know that education is hard to get in there because the prison gets more money for someone that's doing a degree or a postgraduate or something like that than they would get for somebody learning to read and write. And it's been a long time since I was in, but it was like that back then. And it's really sad because there are so many prisoners that are illiterate and I believe would thrive with an education, but they can't get it because there are people coming in that have had access to an education, and I just find it heartbreaking, really. I think that, I said this the other day, that something needs doing. That there is so much catharsis in doing things like this for me, and there's so much catharsis in using your story to help educate other people and into writing books. And I know that some of it's a bit dodgy when it comes to proceeds of crime and writing books in prison and things like that. However, you could write a a fictional book,
Mhm.
and then that could get paid to someone else and they could pay money into your account. I didn't know how it can work that way.
Yeah.
And we need initiatives like that run by people like ourselves, that understand the system. But unfortunately, the professionals within the system really don't care.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I do sometimes. I wonder, what the answers are, because I think we, between us, those with lived experience know what the answers are. But the thing is, changing stuff is always an uphill struggle, because I mean, I've been in prisons and I've seen people come in, officers mostly, who come in with, good attitude, great work ethic, and then they realize after 3 or 4 months that actually they're not. I remember an officer who left her job after about 9 months because she felt she couldn't affect any change, and one of her colleagues felt that she was too empathetic with prisoners, which I found fascinating. I just thought, too empathetic? That's insane. That is really insane. But and this is the thing about the human aspect of things, because although you have that them and us thing. I remember being in a particular position in the prison, and this particular officer came and spoke to me on a one-to-one, proper prisoner staff relationship, but not in a secretive manner, but not broadcasting to everybody that she just came and she said, "Look, I'm leaving, and thank you for all the work that you've done." And I was just like, "Well, I haven't really done anything." She said, "No, you have," because I was doing information, advice, and guidance at the time, helping people to get ROTL, to get day release from the prison. And she said, "Yeah, I used to be in this particular world before I joined the prison service, and I'm going to go back to it because this just isn't for me." 9 months in, it's so sad to see stuff like that. But this is where it's at. I think, I don't know. I mean, you see, politicians from this country going and learning stuff from around the world, but I just wonder sometimes why they bother, because nothing ever seems to change, and nothing changes if nothing changes, which is just really. Do you know what I wish? If there was the genuine appetite for it, I did say this, and I've been disabused of the idea now because I've struggled to move on with my career at the moment. But I wanted to become, not even for stats or praise or anything like that, but I wanted to become the first ex-offender to hold a governorship in a prison, to do things my way, to prove that things can be done differently. Reoffending can be quite low, but you have to treat people. See, the thing is, we've seen all these reports that say that prisoners, no matter what their background, need three things. They need accommodation, they need gainful employment, and they need supportive networks and relationships. And very often, those things are destroyed because you have an individual or individuals in prisons whose mortgages depend on them signing or not signing a day release because they're risk averse for whatever the reason. So you wonder immediately, what is the point of open prison if you don't want to sign ROTL and let people out? Yes, I know that there have been some failures, but in comparison to the successes, there are hundreds of people going out on ROTL on a daily basis. I mean, I know one prison alone that ROTLs about 110 people every day. And that's just one prison, So there's hundreds going out on a regular basis. And you just wonder, when you get individuals who, because of their biases, because of their core beliefs, may see somebody and think, well, actually, I'm not going to sign your ROTL, or I'm not going to progress you on that or this. Just it comes back to the what you were saying about the education as well, just in terms of the basic stuff not being attractive because it's not lucrative, whereas degrees and stuff like that will get pushed through, and because the finance that can be realized. It's sad, it's horrible, and then we wonder why reoffending is so high. And then I kind of come to a place in my mind where I think, is this by design or is it by default? And I mean, I'll leave everyone to kind of come to their own conclusions.
I think that you find that there are many prisoners that have done long sentences that, they call it institutionalized. And you can see it in their eyes. You can see it in someone's eyes that have sort of given up to the system, and it's really sad to see, because it's prisoners just broken them, and I just don't understand, how that can be allowed in a so-called civilized society, how men can be treated like rats.
Yeah. And it's funny because, well, not funny, but recently I was hearing about a situation because, apart from the work that I do, occasionally I get people reaching out to me on, Facebook, on Instagram, that kind of thing. And recently I had a family member reach out to me with a letter from a loved one who basically has written a letter saying he doesn't want parole. He'd rather stay in prison because, they're just not hearing him. They're not listening to him. I mean, I don't know the full ins and outs of what's gone on, so I can't, I'm not going to make any judgments or anything like that. But isn't it sad when it gets to a stage where people are writing letters and saying, I don't want to get out. I'm quite happy to stay in prison. It's that, that is institutionalized. And again, we wonder why, or, what will happen when people are kind of let out to get on with their lives. And I just despair, I really do. I just implore people in a position, in government, in parliament, to look again at this and to allow people to safely be released and get on with their lives in a positive and productive way. That might seem a little bit kind of, mollycoddling or airy-fairy, but it really isn't. This is the thing. Going back to that guy that I met from the Ivory Coast who just said, you judge a society by the way it treats its prisoners. And what is really sad is that, I mean, it's all sad, and I've lost count of the amount of times I've used the word sad, is that when you look at, never mind prisoners, but you look at other areas of life in society and the way people are treated, veterans, for example, and elderly, all a range of people, and you just think, well, actually, people who've never done anything wrong in their lives are treated quite poorly. Then what chance have prisoners got of being treated as humans? And this is the mission actually of people like Amy Patel, who was the solicitor who got me out. She worked incredibly hard. We became friends as a result because she worked she worked for a number of years attending, I can't remember how many parole boards now to represent me, and then ultimately eventually making such strong, robust representations that I was released at the last hearing, obviously. But it's also part of the mission of Raphael Rowe and his foundation to go on a crusade, really, of trying to join dots and allow people who are returning to society, returning to the community, to be humanized rather than dehumanized. That's the simple mission, that's the simple aim. And when the aim is to try and just treat people as humans, you just got to wonder, what's the question? What is the question? And it reminds me, I was telling somebody about the Stanford experiment, which I never knew about until I went to prison. And I think that unfortunately we're still sleepwalking into those scenarios. And for the benefit of people that don't know the Stanford experiment, it was an experiment in the 1970s, around 71, I think it was, where in the Stanford University they had some volunteers who acted as guards and some that acted as prisoners. And within I think it was in the first 24 hours of the experiment, the guards were abusing the prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and these guys were paid like $15, which was an awful lot of money back then. $15 for a week's experiment. It didn't get completely shut down, but you know, the guards brutalized the prisoners. And bear in mind that these people were just students; they weren't even real prisoners or guards. They were just playing a role.
Yep.
And I think this is a real problem in society and in life, is that, you know, when, you know, you're given a particular cap and you abuse it. And I mean, look at the state we're in with policing at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely terrible. And you know, especially, you know, in Norfolk where I live, there are so many police that are getting done for corruption, that are losing the jobs. You know, there's quite a famous case with a PCSO that then became a police officer that you know, was done for corruption within the first year. You know, there are police officers that have got through in all sort of, you know, different places in Britain that have hidden criminal records for violence and things like this. And we're not even scratching the surface, and we're now starting to see that, you know, the government doing what they say that they need to do to bring these people to justice, but it's still only scratching the surface of corruption. You know, as you know, I've had both Peter Blexley and Gary Rogers, who are both undercover policemen. You know, and Gary Rogers exposed certain Masonic influences within the police force, within the Met. It's not good. It's not good when fraternities are running law, but it's still happening, and that's, you know, I don't even know where to start, mate, to be honest. It's I could talk about this all day. It's a mess. We have a system that's an absolute mess, and it's not just us. You know, like America. I was talking to a guy a few weeks ago that was tricked into driving a car for a robbery, and ended up getting 144 years.
Wow.
144 years for driving a car. And he got done. It's kind of like the Jenga law here.
Yeah.
Kind of like joint enterprise here. He got done for basically everyone that was robbed. That was a single count. So that was something like 9 counts of aggravated robbery. And because he wouldn't snitch on his mates, his mates got the deals and he didn't. And he ended up doing, I think it was about 14, 15 years. But he got 144 years. He's now a principal of an educational system over in America where he lives. Basically a beauty school, but you know, teaching people part of that, like hairdressing and things. But 144 years, that's just as daft as, you know, some of the indeterminate sentences over here.
Yeah.
I can see that, like I said, there are some people that need it, and there are some people that need to die in prison.
Yeah.
That's what the whole life sentence for. You know, the former 60s, 70s entertainer so-called entertainer that's just gone back. You know, that he will die in prison, which is not a bad thing, especially when you get caught for by the press, trying to get the is it the dark web on your phone?
Yeah.
Stupidity is I think it's imprinted in a lot of people. And I understand people like that and Ian Watkins, and there are people that should die in prison, and I get that. And there are people that but some people need compassion, like the ones that are kicking off, that are on IPP, and they're kicking off because they've been treated so badly by the system that it set their mental health off. And as soon as they get into an argument with anybody, as soon as they get into an argument with a screw, that's it. That's on their record, and that's a longer time. And why do we keep punishing people like that? I don't understand the inhumanity in it.
Well,
especially for nicking a bike or making mistakes. I can understand these people that are, constant knife crime and stuff like that. The ones that are street crime and county lines and things like that. I can understand that, but what I don't understand is mentally ill people being put into a system. And when clearly, if they got the right mental health help, they could flourish in within a sort of semi-normal society. But they're not allowed that, and that is what is just heartbreaking. You've admitted yourself that you weren't always a good lad, and that you deserve to go to prison for what you did, but you also deserve to get out. But to do that amount of time for something that should have got you 6 months.
I think so if I didn't get an IPP, I would have got 4 years, and I would have done a couple of years. And yeah, I still can't quite get my head around it. 12 years of my life was spent in prison, of one form or another, whether it was open or not. And right now I'm trying to reclaim, those years, reclaim life as it could have been. I think the thing is, while I went away clean, I was fighting for some time addiction. I was fighting, as alcoholism and addiction to hard drugs. And when I went away, I was 11 months, just turned 11 months clean, but I was still really, fresh. So it could have gone either way. Fortunately for me, I managed to stay clean in prison. I didn't use any mood or mind altering substances at all. Today I'm still clean, but it very easily could have gone the other way, because I saw so many people who just threw caution to the wind. They decided to use. And one of the things about addiction is it is cunning, baffling, powerful, as you're taught in some of these fellowships. And you could use maybe a small amount in prison and then be clean for 6 months, but then use again, and you never get out of it, because you kind of see it as, well, I'm in prison, so it doesn't matter. But you never get any form of clean time, which is why I'm so grateful that I've been clean as long as I have, because I could be using now. I could easily be using now, and I know that relapse is very real. And there were guys. I remember there was one particular guy who he struggled in open prison, because he, what I've just described there, he went through that, and I saw it to the extent that the open prison, they knew it, and they were just like, well, no, we can't give you any day release, because that that you're not well, and we need to have a duty of care for you. And I just thought, well, yes, but also maybe if he'd have been allowed to progress and stuff. And it's a difficult one, because you have to be kind of objective and reasonable. And yes, of course, it wouldn't be reasonable to be allowing people who are off their nuts out on day release from prison. It just wouldn't look good. But at the same time, I think if you treat people in that way, I mean, it was Lord Wolf, I think. Was it Lord Wolf? One of these lords, I can't remember who, that said, if you lock people up and treat them like animals, don't be surprised if you get bitten. Yep. And this is the reality of the system. I don't think there's an argument that prison isn't a necessary evil, if we put it that way. I mean, it's necessary. I don't think many people would argue against that. I think that the question is really how you go about containing and locking people up that need to be locked up, but you treat them in a just and humane way. Because you see, this is the thing. I mean, one of the examples that always goes through my head, I can't remember his name and it doesn't matter, but I remember there was an MP, there's this politician who argued to take away legal aid from certain cases. And it went through. And then literally, I don't even know what the time span was, but literally after those reforms came in, he needed legal aid. But it wasn't available to him because he had gone through supporting these changes that saw legal aid taken away from those particular cases. And so this is the problem with this, is that until things like this affect people, it's like they just don't have an interest, which is why I say 18 billion. So is this by design or is it by default? And if it's not by design, then let's save 18 billion and spend it on things that we really need. Let's spend it on things. Let's help people to get a basic education so that they can read and write and be more useful to society. Let's help them to kind of take pride in their neighborhood, so that graffiti and knife crime and all this kind of stuff is minimal or mitigated completely. It is so sad. But I think one of the other things as well, and it's something you said that made me think of this. I think one of the difficulties is that when we get people in positions, because reportedly with the Met situation, with the police situation and the report that came out, the Casey review, I understand that the commissioner doesn't like the language that was used. We need to have honest conversations, Don't get into let's forget about the semantics. Just because you don't like the word institutional, all right, yes, maybe it's not everybody, but it's an institution and it's a big problem. So this is why the terminology is what it is, and I don't have a particular. I'm dispassionate about it. I don't really have a view one way or the other. It doesn't affect me in that sense. But if we start getting caught up in language all the time, we're not having the honest conversations, nothing will change. And I think we missed a trick. One of the tricks that I think we missed as a country was lockdown, because I know that a lot of people were very afraid of, what was it we called it, the Great Reset, or the something. We were fearful of something that was going to be imposed upon us. But you know what? Maybe resetting some of the things that are besetting us now isn't a bad idea. I know people who, they're abolitionists. They want to see certain things completely abolished. Me, I think I'm probably leaning more towards reform rather than anarchy. Into reform. But if people in positions won't listen, and then they start getting hung up on words, I'm not sure that we're going to make much progress in my lifetime.
No, but that's the problem when you've got when they say that we are a prevention society, but really we're a punishment society. We're punished for crimes. We're guilty until proven innocent, and I don't care what anybody says. You know, it's never innocent. You have to prove your innocence, and you know, they don't have to prove your guilt. You have to prove your innocence. And when we focus on punishment, we lose the ability to be able to prevent. Because people get stuck in that same cycle of behavior, this restrictive stance with violence, and you know, violence begets violence, and it keeps happening. And until we start looking at a system that treats its prisoners with a bit of respect, and treats its prisoners with the fact that they need an education, then we will start preventative measures, because that changes the way that a person thinks. But if they keep getting punished and punished and punished and punished for a crime that they've committed, and they're in prison because that is their punishment, what's their incentive to get out? None. So they're just going to get trapped in that same vicious cycle, and you know, then it's people argue about human rights and things like that, and men like Alan Lord and to an extent Paul Massey, they gave their freedom so these things could be highlighted, so prisoners could get treated a bit more humane. You know, because if it wasn't for people like them, I believe that we would still be Victorian draconian punishments there, where you're still slopping out. I don't think people are probably going to get on me for this, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It made me stray away from it. And there are many people that swore they'd never go back because they lived in that draconian way. But now, you know, you get tellies in your room and you can get PlayStations, you know. When there are men my age and a bit older that fought to get a radio, it's, you know, I don't necessarily think it's too easy in prison. I don't think prison will ever be easy, but I think that there are some people that, if not institutionalized, they're acclimatized. They don't mind giving away a bit of freedom because it gives them a bit of gravitas with the mates, or you know, they give up a certain thing of their freedom. They get you know, they get seen as a certain way. They get certain respect for what they've done, for who they are, and they have that sort of life in prison when on the outside they would be probably Mr. Nobody. And I think that we do need to look at that as well. I personally think the whole thing needs a massive overhaul. And spending that 18 billion for a few years on looking at how we can become a prevention society rather than a punishment society. You know, we need to put more money into urban areas. We need to put more money into education for kids on the street and some adults on the street, you know, because austerity breeds crime.
Yeah. Do you know what I like? I heard somebody use this saying in recovery, actually, and I like it for, you know, the kind of society at large, and it was just something along the lines of, when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, then change is inevitable. you know, and so I think that there will come a time. I mean, if we look around at the moment, you know, certainly not in my lifetime, apart from knowing that something called the Winter of Discontent existed in the 70s, in 70, 79, I think. Apart from that, I mean, when have we seen the amount of strikes and kind of, you know, almost breakdown of society? You know, it's never been seen before, and I think,
No.
you know, it's a shame, but we probably have to get to that place where, you know, the pain of staying the same is greater, so that change will come.
And it
Yeah,
needs to. It does need to, and I agree. And it's not going to be easy for people on whichever side of the fence that they find themselves on. Change is hardly ever easy to digest.
mm,
It's needed, but like you say, something really needs to happen.
yeah,
You know, the last time you know, like you were saying about the strikes, the last time I remember anywhere near was growing up in a mining town in Yorkshire in the 80s,
mm,
because that affect, you know, Mrs. Thatcher in her infinite wisdom decides that it's cheaper to buy coal from South Africa or France
mm,
than it is to mine it in Wales or Yorkshire. So mining towns that surround mining towns,
mm.
they're striking. People are losing their jobs. People are losing their lives, and they did.
Yeah,
Uh,
have a fan.
yeah, people couldn't. There were men in our town that couldn't handle not being able to provide for their families, so they took their own lives. There are towns that, you know, even now, 40 years down the line, there are towns that have never recovered from that, because once the mine started to close down,
Mm,
then the markets, they started to suffer. The markets started to suffer. Then the local establishments, like the shops, they started to suffer.
mm.
You know, I remember you couldn't get potatoes for love nor money at one point. You know, so then businesses start to go down, austerity starts to get worse,
Yeah,
and towns, they never recover. And then because of that, crime then raise its ugly head. I can understand that. Um, you know, the railway shut down. That affected my dad, who
mm,
was a railwayman. Um, you know, we were by far from poor, but we do need a leadership that can understand, like, and be able to implement change, like Mr. Scargill and like Mr. Kinnock
mm.
were able to do. We need to inspire the nation, not want to watch them fail.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh wow. I don't know. Well, you know, one of these things I've embraced is uh, I can't remember, and I know I read it, and I think it said it was Theodore Roosevelt. Um, there's a saying, it just says, you know, do what you can with what you got where you are. And that, for me at the moment, that's my mantra. All I can do is what I can where I am with what I have. Um, you know, it's little, but you know, whatever difference I can make, I try to make. You know, even if it's just responding to somebody on Facebook who asks for some experience, strength, and hope around IPP. If it's somebody, I mean, I've had people ring me randomly, try to ring me anyway on Facebook and stuff. Don't always answer it because, you know, it's just random. But Even if it's just having a chat with somebody. It's what I've got where I am, and that's that's it. Because this really it's so old hat, but it's the truth, and that is it's not a race for the swift.
No.
It's it really is a marathon, and you need a bit of stamina. I mean, I learned that very early because in the first 2-3 years of doing the IPP, I was very angry. I was very I was like but I railed up against the system that I was never going to beat in that sense because I was locked up. I didn't have the key. Ultimately, when I started to relax and started to just be almost too chilled, it's like they wanted rid of me.
Yeah, it's guilt, isn't it? They want to get they want you to feel guilt, and the society wants you to feel guilt. I think it was Dr. Zeus that said, I think it was a law, actually, it's one of my kids' favourite films. Unless someone somewhere cares an awful lot, then nothing is ever going to change. And I think that's where we're at the minute. Unless people like us care an awful lot and aim to inspire and to educate people into wanting to implement change and inspire people into caring a lot, then we're just going to keep going around in circles and circles and circles and circles, and we can debate this all day because it's never going to change.
Well, I'm making it my mission wherever I am, wherever I get the opportunity, I talk about this stuff, whether it's kind of senior leaders, organizations, representatives, whatever it may be, because they need to hear it. And those that it may seem a little petulant actually, but those who don't, because I did meet an individual, actually a bit of a celebrity the other day, and I went up to this particular individual. I won't say who, but I went up to them at this event, and I just said, have you heard about IPP? And when I tried to explain what it was, before I could get anywhere, the individual just looked at me, turned up their nose, and just said, "Why on earth would I want to hear about IPP?" And I just thought, "Oh, okay." And I was quite sad by that, because they are in a position where they can give voice to some of this stuff. They are in a position where they're likely to know somebody who knows somebody who's on an IPP or has been affected by IPP in some way. They are in a position where they work with people who have, tried to campaign around IPP, but they just were completely aloof to, the idea of hearing about the impact of IPP, sadly.
And it's sad. I mean, I've been very lucky in some of the celebrities that I've had the pleasure to speak with. I interviewed one a couple of months back, and we've become friends. Messaging each other, and he's become quite a avid listener of some of the stuff that I've got to say, because I gave him access to my works online. And it's inspired him. And he admits that he had it really easy upbringing. He was brought up by, a celebrity life. His dad's celebrity and stuff like that. And he admits that he wouldn't even begin to know about this sort of life. And then he sees the stuff that I write and wants to know more and genuinely wants to help. It's not like the ones that have said, I'd like to help and I will help you, and then you never hear from them again. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him, but it's people like that listen to stuff like this. I'll be sending this to him because I think I think that we need to educate those that have an ability to spread their voice better than we can. You know, the whole reason I do this is to give other people a voice. You know, this has always been my mission since I started back in October 2020. But, you know, my God-given mission is to be a voice for the voiceless. But sometimes we, the voices, need amplifying. And I do know that there are celebrities out there that will listen. People like Ricky Gervais and people like that will sort of help, you know, bring these sort of situations to the forefront via Twitter or whatever. But there's so much toxicity these days on social media. It's just so hard to want to carry on.
Well, it's funny you say that. I mean, there's a couple of things really. Firstly, you know, thank you for what you do, because, you know, it's the second time you've had me on to kind of give voice to what I'm trying to get out there, and I appreciate that, because, you know, I know how laborious it can be, you know, to kind of put stuff together and do it, you know, as consistently as you do. But the other thing is that recently I had there was an article published about IPP. It wasn't about me, but I happened to be on the article, and an individual decided to take my parole report and spread it around and kind of make comments on social media, so much so that I ended up I was advised by probation. I didn't want to do it, but I was basically advised to report it to the police, because although some of it's already out in the public domain, this individual's been doing this quite a number of times. They've done it like 2 or 3 times actually. Sorry, not 4 times, 3 times, trying to get the same impact. And what they're doing is targeting people who know me or people that are acquainted with me in some way to try and, you know, convince them that I'm a really bad guy. But, you know, it's a long time ago what's happened. But the thing is, what this individual doesn't do is tell anybody that there was a very brief, you know, relation between us. You know, they don't mention that bit. They choose to omit that. And yeah, it's just really sad. But this is the thing about toxicity and social media, because it can be used for so much good. You know, I'm not out here trying to pretend to be some saint, because I really ain't. I've done some stuff I'm really quite unhappy about. I'm really ashamed of, but, you know, it is the past. I haven't killed anyone. I haven't done any of those other naughty kind of crimes, which doesn't make me, you know, special and different. But at the same time, you know, I just kind of feel that this is a chance to have a second chance, and I kind of think I deserve a second chance. I mean, why wouldn't I?
I mean, none of us are perfect by any sort of way or means. And you have the emotional intelligence to be able to go, well, yeah, I've done some bad things in my life and I feel guilt and I feel shame for some of the things that I've done. You know, and you are fighting to make a change. You are fighting against injustice, the injustice of a corrupt and broken system. And it's like shouting into a wind tunnel. And you often find yourself breathless because, you know, and hoarse because you just keep shouting it, and it feels like people aren't listening. And it's a tireless task. And, you know, I just want to thank you for what you do for these prisoners that are still there, because if it weren't for people like you, they would be forgotten. You know, I only ever want to amplify other people's voices. Yes, I have my story, and I'm blessed to be able to share my story like you do, and some of my learned education and combined wisdom that I've taken on. I'm blessed to be able to share that on other people's platforms. But this platform I forever want to keep. While I do have my voice, I want to be an amplification of voices like yours, because there aren't any places that do that. There aren't, TED really doesn't do that. It has an elitism about it, and not just TED. And I don't think it's all their fault. I think it's down to how society see it. There are other platforms that really go up against people like us, and I don't think that change is ever going to happen unless people like us keep banging on about it. And I will always keep championing people like you, and I will always keep getting you back on to share your voice, because it's important. And people might think, oh, it's the same stuff, same stuff, same stuff. I don't care. It needs to be. I'm not a sort of person that learns the first time. Sometimes it needs to be drilled in.
Yeah.
I understand there are people out there that, that and I love them, that do podcasts, and they talk about their old times and prison, and they go on each other's podcasts, and that's fantastic. They bring awareness to that sort of life. They don't need me. I don't talk about it often. I talk about recovery and other things, because I think that for me is important, and I don't ever want to get bigger than what this is. Because then that dilutes the message. I only ever want to spread a message of love, joy, hope, redemption. I think people can find redemption. If I didn't believe that, then I wouldn't be here. I'm coming up to 9 years clean. 8 years ago this week, I was in hospital having the worst month of my life. Convinced that I caused the apocalypse because of the life that I led, because of the guilt and the shame. And that's what people don't realize. When we are living a shame society, saying you should be ashamed of what you've done, and you do feel shame, these things, they drive you into insanity. You say, I'm an addict, so drugs aren't my problem. They're my solution. My problem is disconnection, which comes with drugs, drink, any other sort of addictive and obsessive behavior. But doing this is reconnection. We need to reconnect. I will always bang on about redemption in sharing your story. There's a massive catharsis in sharing your story. We all need forgiveness. We all desire forgiveness. That's one massive journey that I've been on, and that's still on. To an extent, I'm still on, because I forgave. Even though Liam Dean was murdered by his cellmate less than a year into his sentence for what he did to my niece, I had to forgive him because it was driving me absolutely batshit crazy. It was affecting my mood. It was affecting my family. It was affecting my children. It was affecting my wife. It was affecting the people around me in my town because I was getting irritable. It was affecting people within my church. And I think that to forgive, not forget what he did, because I can never forget. And we were left with questions that will never be answered, thanks to the man that did it, of a relatively small drug debt, I might add. we all want to feel that we can make amends, that we can make a difference.
Yeah.
You know, we said this on the Ex-Bad Lads podcast the other day with Frank Bottenary and Kevin Lane, that you know, all we can ever hope to do is tell people how it is, how it was, and educate on. You know, I might do these, and 1, 2, maybe 10 people might see it, and that's 10 people for me, or 1 person for me, and I'm happy with that. Any more than that is an absolute bonus. There are people out there that won't settle for anything less than 10,000 or whatever. How do we change society? We do it one at a time.
Yeah.
We change people's perception and view. I'm very blessed to have been able to change the perception of some people that are in, you know, slightly higher in society than I am, and then they can now take that to the next level.
Yeah.
They have an empathy for that. You know, and it's not just one person, several people that I've had the blessings to be able to speak to, that have been, you know, a staple of British TV for the past 40, 50, 60 years. And they would never have known about this sort of life and actually how people like us feel had they not stepped out in faith and come on my platform.
Yeah.
So, you know, I will always battle for you. You know, you're my brother, and I love you as a brother, and I will always be there to amplify your voice, because your voice is more important than most.
Oh wow, thank you, bro. Thank you. You know, it's funny, thinking that with some of this stuff around, you know, just around IPP, I wish some of these guys, you know, in decision-making positions would do a step 1, you know, and admit that there is a problem. You know, maybe that would be a step in the right direction. I think, you know, coming into recovery is probably one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Yeah.
Because there are still things that I do, you know, not mind or mood or altering substances, but I end up going to step 1 and thinking, actually, you know what, this is a problem. Maybe I need to cut this out, whether it's sugar or whatever it may be. But yeah, no, you know, you're absolutely my brother, and I really appreciate you and what you do. About 6, maybe a few more months ago, I remember there was a guy who I met through some work that I do on a voluntary basis. And he came to me and he said to me, he said, "You're a really beautiful human being." And I said, "Why, you know, why did you say that?" He said to me, "I watched you, I watched your interview on The Accidental Journalist." So the interview that we did all that time ago, he sat and watched it from beginning to end. And, you know, this was stuff that he didn't know, because we've never really had that kind of conversation. So it just shows that, you know, one at a time, it does, when you have honest conversations, because just like violence begets violence, honesty begets honesty, you know. So when you're honest with me, it allows me to be honest with you. It allows me to, you know, to drop the mask. It allows me to just sit in my truth.
Exactly. I mean, it's just, you know, I was saying this today. I don't always have confidence in, you know, in what I do, because for most of my life, and I think you'll probably be able to identify this, I was told that I'd never amount to anything. And you know, you say this, and people tell me that they watch, and I'm seeing more and more people watch, and you know, I'm getting bigger numbers and bigger numbers. But you know, what hit home for me was I had to go for a set of X-rays a few months ago, and the radiographer recognized me as the accidental journalist and recognised me for what I do on here and for the voices that I give amplification to. And that was just an absolute beautiful thing, you know, because he said to me, you know, I've had a good education. You know, I'm a radiographer. I've gone through university and I've gone through all these courses. I've had a good upbringing, and I would never have known most of these stories had they not been brought to my attention because I came across you accidentally on Facebook. And I think that's kind of nice, you know. Accidentally found something because somebody accidentally became a journalist after he wanted to be an actor. And I absolutely love it. I love doing this. It makes me happy. It's tiresome. It's not easy. It's not always easy. And it sometimes does take a lot out of you, as you know. I couldn't do these every day. I have done for a few weeks, but it's so rewarding in the fact that not even for people, you know, now starting to recognize me for what I do. Like, we all want that recognition, don't we? We all sort of want that pat on the back. I think it's nice, but I think that it's the voices that they're now starting to hear. I'm of a very middle class church. I live in a very middle class town. You know, I'm a red ass Yorkshire boy. I'm a brought up in a working class environment, and I now live in a town in Norfolk that is now seeing austerity for the first time in a long time. It's quite a middle class town, quite a middle class church. And I tell them these things that I do, and I get them to watch these things that I do. And some of them have bought my books, and they've gone, "Wow, you know, you look like a vandal, but you write like a poet," which was one of the more nicer ones, because you know you can't always judge a book by its cover. I might look like a 16 and a half stone balding bearded guy, but you know I didn't always look like that. I was always taken as a smackhead crackhead. I was called a dirty little druggie a lot of the time. I have a life now thanks to my wife and thanks to God, and you know that attribute, and the town that's kind of adopted me, and the community that has just come on Facebook is absolutely phenomenal. You know, the support that we're now getting, that I'm now getting, the emotional support. I have fans. You know,
that's awesome.
I'm a 46-year-old fella that has fans, and this is a man that people used to cross the street to get away from.
Snap,
so you know what it's like, and it's such a pleasure to be able to give back. No,
it is. That's, you know, it's that whole thing, and I play it in my mind all the time, because I remember when I first came into recovery, I'd hear people say, "You only keep what you have by giving it away," and I never knew what they meant. Now I know what they meant. You know, I understand.
Well, you say we need to do a step one. You know, doing this for me is a step 12. You know, you only get to keep what we have by giving it away. Carrying the message.
That's right.
You know, beyond the rooms. I'm beyond the rooms. I haven't been to a meeting in a long time. I do have people that I speak to. I personally found that most of my local meetings were quite toxic, and ill, and that I know that's not of every meeting. You know, but when you go into meetings and they're selling smack in the car park, then you're like, well, I can't really go to that meeting anymore, can I? So you know, I get a lot what I need online. And there are resources for that. People don't understand that AA, NA, GA, CA, they all have large presences online.
Do you know what? That's not a bad shout. I mean, I do service at the moment in the rooms, and one of my commitments it's coming up to its end soon. I'm actually kind of relieved because I can do things a little bit differently. I can reclaim some time to do some other things. I will still keep my 1 foot in kind of thing. Well, I don't want to be out. I will still keep my hand in. But yeah, I just want to kind of move away. And like you say, there are online resources these days. There's nothing now that isn't accessible, in a hybrid way, whether it's in person or online. And yeah, it's a shame it's taken COVID to prove that we could do that.
Exactly. The program is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's just some of the people that are a little bit left to be desired.
Yeah, no, I hear you completely. Trust me, I hear you.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I love it. And I'm a member of many sort of Facebook groups that are all recovery groups, like the Wave Trust, and a lot of groups that teach about emotional intelligence and learning about trauma and trauma bonding and stuff like that, to give people the tools that they need to be able to not just get clean, stay clean.
Yeah.
It takes a kick-ass warrior to get clean, but it takes a king to be able to carry that on and stay clean. And I hold my hat up and tip it to anybody that can do that, because I know from personal experience that it can be the hardest thing ever.
Yeah.
Even admitting it.
Yeah. It took me a while. It took me a while, but we get there in the end, hopefully.